Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of BRM TV. Coming up, we take a look at John Ahern's Madder Valley, one of the pioneering layouts which set the railway truly in the landscape as we've come to know it. Meanwhile, Phil Parker shows how you can add a fence to your layout, one of a slightly different type however, and Modelling Anarchy. I show how you can add buffers and couplings to hop up the detail on your rolling stock. Let's get started.
This scene on the Madder Valley Railway is not the work of the Pendon team. It was all built by one man, John Ahern. He began it in 1937 and was the first person to create scenery like this around a model railway. Writing many books and magazine articles in both Model Railway News and Model Railway Constructor led to the layout having an almost legendary status. The imaginary scene shows the quiet countryside along the River Madder. On the high ground to the right lies the village of Gammon Magna, with its main street curving up the hill to the Norman Castle, admission to which is 6d. Gammon Magna is the upper terminus of the Madder Valley Railway. If you notice the road vehicles outside the station, there's a horse-drawn delivery van and an open-top bus. There's also a cab with a very tired horse, based on the last horse cab in London where John lived. It used to stand outside Victoria Station. Another sight that will be very familiar to everybody from the 1930s is an ice cream tricycle with the words "Stop Me and Buy One" painted on the front. At the lower level is the terminus to Gammon End. The station building is based on the closed Watlington in Oxfordshire. A toast rack charabanc stands in the station yard there, and also a hansom cab has moved along. The green car beside the railings is a Bugatti, and on the station platform with a large plate camera is that John Ahern. He was a keen photographer and motoring enthusiast after all. As it leaves the upper village of Gammon Magna, the railway runs along the side of the Madder Valley towards Much Madder, Madderport and the sea. After crossing the river on a trestle bridge, it dives into a short rock tunnel and emerges into a rocky gorge. The tunnel and gorge are based on the Aberglaswyn Pass in North Wales on the Welsh Highland Railway. The river now sweeps around to the left, and in the middle of the stream lies Cuckoo Island with its ruined temple. Behind the curving river there's a mill, and in its yard is a Sentinel steam lorry, something that had been very common in the 1920s. Moving on, we come to the village of Much Madder, an attractive village with several interesting buildings such as the Brandy Cag Inn and Bert's Garage, a very typical building of its period. Down by the river is a boatyard and slipway. Next to this, between the station and the river, is the scrapyard or village dump. You'll see several old bedsteads, tin bars and the remains of a bull-nosed Morris in there. Leaving Much Madder, the river swings around a low hill and enters a lock. Beside this is the Moonrakers Inn with its tiny tea garden. The river crosses the lattice bridge and enters Madderport, passing the timber yard and a large warehouse. Everywhere on the Madder Valley, the buildings are based on real ones gathered from around the country. In the town, the back row of shops and other buildings are from a postcard of Ramsey on the Isle of Man. Further along to the right is a cream hotel marked Strong & Company, Romsey, which would place it in Hampshire. Near the front is an attractive line of shops in the centre of town, which the Pendon team are from Salisbury. John's work always included little humour, hence quibble and cuss the estate agents. We also have the ugly but characteristic corner pub, the China Clipper. Of course, it's the railway that attracts most of the attention, and again, John was happy to gather prototypes from not only around the country, but indeed around the world. Here we have a Welsh pony from the Festiniog Railway, and there's Caledonia from the Isle of Man. John was always quite happy to stretch narrow gauge locomotives to fit his standard gauge line. The most exotic looking engine comes from the famous Darjeeling and Himalayan Railway in West Bengal. Building the locos was covered in John's 1948 book Miniature Locomotive Construction, still a valuable resource for modellers. The station at Madderport forms the headquarters of the Madder Valley Railway. The buildings aren't imposing, but there is a large goods shed with sidings and all the paraphernalia of a small coastal harbour. The harbour offices are behind the station, and the original, built in 1822, can still be seen at Poole in Dorset. Behind the quay stands the Royal Oak Dining Rooms, and they offer a 3-course lunch at 1 shilling and 9 pence. Quite expensive at the time for a place like Madderport. The Madder Valley Railway is a unique example of early railway modelling. Quite apart from its value as a relic, it's a fascinating and carefully observed scene that tells us an awful lot about the 1930s in small town and countryside Britain. It's a great achievement that, despite its age, we're still able to enjoy this layout at Pendon. For a project I'm working on at the moment, I need some scruffy fencing. The sort of thing you saw along the side of the road and industrial estates and all sorts of places in the 1970s and a bit before that. Before we had to go proper health and safety and keep people safe, the sort of fencing that was probably as dangerous as the things it was protecting you from. Anyway, to do that, because I need so much, I am not going to scratch build that. Cutting out all these individual verticals, it's just going to take me forever. So what I've found is this stuff, which is some old wooden fencing from Scale Model Scenery. Very nice little kit. Comes as a couple of sheets of laser cut laser board. Not actually sure what laser board is. I believe it's it feels like it's a sort of cardboard, but I have asked what this stuff is and can we get proper sheets of it, and I've been told it's a secret. So the answer is I don't know. What I do know is it cuts very nicely, and I guess that it has to be very high quality because all the laser cutting going on, and you don't want to set fire to the material and all that sort of thing. That's probably bad for production. Anyway, get 2 parts. Get the fencing front and get the supports for the back. First job really is to cut out all the bits from the sheet. Now, the parts are held in with little nibs that haven't been cut through properly on the laser, and all we have to do is identify them and cut them out of the sheet. Now, the easiest way to do that is to do it from the back, because you'll probably be able to see where the little nibs are. There we go, they're there. And so all I've got to do is sit down and carefully, with a sharp knife, just cut through all the nibs. Never try and push this stuff out. Right, okay, here we go. And there we go. You do end up with some rather nice little, very, very accurate square pieces of laser board, and they're worth hanging on to, because if you're building cardboard buildings, or indeed any sort of building, they're perfect putting inside the corners of the walls, because of course they're bang on square, and they're a great way of bracing the corners. Right, now, the idea is very simply you glue the supports on the back of the fencing, and there you have it, a nice scruffy fence ready for painting. But I like to go a stage further and add in a little bit of corrugated iron. Where the fence has broken, where the kids in those 1970s public information films have naughtily broken through the fencing and then got onto the building site or whatever was being protected. And if you remember a 1970s public information film, that's exactly what kids did all the time apparently, and then had terrible, terrible accidents. So
be safe, kids, don't break through the fencing. So what I'll do is I'll take out a few bits of vertical, and then I will stick these to the supports very carefully. Right, now I'm going to do that with rocket card glue. You can see how much I use this because of the state of the glue pot. Let's hope it's still coming out. This stuff is incredibly runny. As you can see, drips everywhere. But usually I'll apply it to the model by putting a little pool on my modelling board and applying it with a screwdriver. But for this, if you hold the glue and squirt upwards, you'll be surprised how controllable it actually is. If you're really worried, there is a little fine nozzle included with each bottle. Right, I've got a bit of corrugated plastic card, and this is from Southeastern Fine Cast, this piece. But you can use I think Slater's do some, and Will's do some clear plastic version, which is ideal because it's thin, and you've got corrugations on both sides. The stuff they do for buildings is quite thick, so not right for this job, because you need something thin and you need to be able to see both sides of it. I cut out a bit to fit in the gap to stop those terrible 1970s kids getting through through there. Little bit of all-purpose glue, and pop that in there. You might think that my fencing is scruffy enough, and actually it probably is. But replacing bits with this sort of thing just adds a little bit of character to the fence, I think. And I mean, there's already some holes and everything made in there. If you're going to use a lot of this stuff, it's probably a good idea to put that patch over the hole, or put a board over the hole and add a bit more detail and life to your fence. Anyway, that's the fence basically ready to go. The next job is to paint it with a basic colour. I'm using Rail Match Frame Dirt. At least I used it on one I made earlier. I prefer to spray these sort of things, partly because it's quicker, you get a thinner coat and you don't block up all the gaps. But as I say, mostly for speed, quite frankly, sitting there faffing around with a paintbrush, you can do it, it will work, just be very sparing with the paint, but it means I can very quickly get everything covered. However, this is a uniform shade of dirty brown, which is great because everything in that era went dirty brown, but I'd like a bit more colour variety. And so what I'm going to use is a set of weathered wood from the Life Colour range. Now, you can be very, very sophisticated with these, or you can do it like I'm going to do, which essentially is pull out the three brown shades, a pot of perfectly ordinary water. I know Life Colour do their own thinner, but actually water will work perfectly well for this. And all I'm going to do is pick up some water, pick up a little bit of paint on the brush, and just paint down like that. I'm looking to give it a wash, hence all the extra water on there, because it will soak in. And you'll see it's actually, after a few moments, it starts to soak in a little bit, and you can really see that the effect is subtle, and it goes away quite fast. Really careful people will make sure that they colour both sides of the fence to match. I'm not too worried, you can't see both sides of the fence. And it's not I'm not doing a particularly neat job at this stage either. The paint will run and tend to run into the places we want it. Again, it's quite a subtle effect because you're using a wash of paint rather than a sort of neat paint on there. And so the slight messiness works to our benefit. You can see the side is starting to. And then having done it with one colour, I'll actually go for the slightly lighter one. This really is quite orangey. So I'll not use masses of that, but there we go. And I'm quite happy to wash over bits that I've washed over before, because the paints will mix, you'll get another shade, but mixing on the model just makes life a little bit easier. And then if you feel, oh, that looks like it's gone a bit orangey, just bung a bit of the dark stuff on. work downwards on this sort of thing, and the paint will run into the places you want it. Now that will probably do the job as far as the wood goes. Put that out of the way and move on to the Rust Wizard collection. I'm using these because they happen to be handy sets that I've got. You may have your own preferred colours for rusts and that sort of thing. I'm going to use the deep rust and the eroding dark rust colours here on the corrugated iron. Again, same sort of technique. Basically, this stuff is water soluble. There is a rust remover in here as well, which I could really do with on my old car, but paint it on the rusty area. I've only got one rusty area to worry about. It doesn't, this stuff I found doesn't sit and work like proper paint. It actually bobbles a bit, which is absolutely perfect. So I guess that's the part of the formulation. And again, I'm mixing the paint on the model. So if you work fairly fast with your paint and it's a bit wet, then you'll be amazed. And this will work with, this is a technique that works with other acrylics, it works with enamels. I'm really quite pleased with the way that's coming out. And there we have it. In the matter of a few minutes, I've created myself a characterful fencing for the layout. I can sit down, make this stuff up, and it's a very, very quick way of building some fencing. But I do like the fact, because it's a laser board and it's a slightly more organic material, it just looks very authentic. Plastic, sometimes you just have to be careful not to get a sheen. This stuff is never going to be shiny. And trust me, the era I'm modelling, the fences definitely were never shiny.
Well, last month you saw me make a start on this aid to scratch building from a company called Impressionist Models. It's run by a guy called Paul Rolly, and it makes into a POA scrap wagon. He's got a few different modern image wagons as part of the range, but we got it up to the stage of running on its axles. This time, however, I'd like to talk through a little bit of the enhancement of the wagon and how we can start to add detail. Things such as sprung buffers, sprung couplings with the correct instanter links, adding the little air hoses, and some underframe detail as well. Now, inside this aid to scratch building, and I'm calling that because it isn't really strictly speaking a kit, were a number of 3D printed accessories, among which the brake levers, as you can see there. These are really, really thick, chunky pieces of 3D printed plastic and probably would not enhance the wagon at all. We've also got an impression, as the title of the company suggests, of Impressionist Models, of an air reservoir. Again, quite chunky and not a lot of detail on that. And then we've got these rigid 3D printed plastic buffers. Now again, these aren't very detailed. There's quite a lot of lines from the printer there left on these components. And more to the point, they're not sprung. All we're trying to do with this wagon is create something that runs reliably, has sprung buffers, reliable coupling, and from a distance on a layout in a rake of wagons, just looks the part. So I'm going to show you how I've added the buffers, and we're going to use some accessories from a company called Slater's Plasticard. So I'd like to start off with the wheels. So last month you might recall that we had some 3 foot 1 inch 3-hole wagon wheels, and that's just fitted because that's what I had to hand at the time. But I've since replaced these with some wheels from Slater's. These are solid plain disc weight wheels, 3 foot 1 inch the same. Now on to the buffers, and the prototype was fitted with some Oleo hydraulic self-contained buffers. Now you'll note, looking at the size of the head of these buffers, that there is a considerable difference in size. Unfortunately, these heads from Slater's are too small. However, I can show you a very cost-effective way of making them larger, and it involves the use of the humble drawing pin. But you want to get rid of that domed appearance, because that just doesn't look like a buffer head. So we'll start off with the Juran shears, trim off the back bit of the drawing pin there. There we go. And we're just left with that little dimple at the back there. So what I'll do now is grab these in a pair of pliers. It won't mark the softer material of the drawing pin there. I'm just going to use a grinder. Now this is in a little mini drill, so we can see we've got a grinder bit there fitted. And we're just going to switch it on and grind away what's left of that material in the back of the buffer there. There we go. So we've got to now try to make this less like a dome, as you can see there on my thumb, and more like the shape of a buffer head. And that's simply achieved by using a pair of pliers. And I'm going to do that just by fitting it between the pliers like so, squeezing and rotating it a bit round at a time. So I'm going to take my time here, because once you've flattened the buffer, it's going to be a lot harder to try and straighten it out afterwards. So the key here is not to over flatten the buffer, or the buffer head rather, and just try and get it right first time, which is easier said than done, but you'll get a feel for this. I mean, brass is a very malleable material, and that's one of the advantages why so many people use it for making models. So I think we're about there, and you can see instantly how much that's flattened out now on my thumb. And if we compare that now with the other buffer head, we can see we're about there. And it's important that you get all of your buffer heads looking the same when you do this, because if you've got one that looks more domed than the other one, it just isn't going to look right. So here we are. This is the buffer head, the standard buffer head from Slater's. I've got a little needle file now, and what I'm going to do is create a key so that the glue can bond between the steel surface of the buffer head and this brass overlay here. Now we've already ground out the back of this here, so this is now rough and it's got a good key for that glue to penetrate. However, this has been turned on a lathe, so it's quite smooth, quite shiny, and we just need to create a key with the file. So working it across there, you can see we start to get that cross hatch pattern, and then we can do a little dry run. And this is where we'll find that if there are any ridges on the underside, that buffer shank will be tilted at an angle, which it isn't, and that means that it's perfectly in line. We can now look at the buffer shank itself, the buffer housing, and that's been cast in lost wax brass. Now, lost wax brass is actually a very careful and clever process where some talented model makers will fit tiny wax components onto a sprue, melting each one with a little iron as they go along. So we can free these components up using a little shear, and this is to get us as close as possible to that brass component. You can see there's even a little bit left there, so I can just use this to trim around the circle there with the base of the buffer. And then we can start to clean it up with a needle file. Now it's important that this is nice and flat, because otherwise the buffer isn't going to sit right on the edge of the wagon. It's either going to be too high or too low, or to the left or to the right. So we need to trim up any of this flash that you can see here on the side, the sprue marks that are left behind. Clean it up with a needle file and just run it across. Check every once in a while to make sure that you're not going too far, or you're not creating any ridge marks or lines where the component's been cast. And you'll see that in the base there we've actually got some material left behind from the casting, and we need to remove that because that needs to be hollow for us to enable us to put the buffer head in. So I'm going to use this little hand drill, and I like to use hand drills rather than the electric mini drill just because you get a better feel as to how far you've gone through with a drill bit. It's slower at the same time, and you can make sure that you've got the angle correct. So we're going to go in from one end. There we go, and we're through the other side. Then we can start to take off the little brass BA bolt at the back of the buffer there. Now you note that there's already a tiny little phosphor bronze spring on the shank there. Whatever you do, do not lose these because you only get enough for the buffers. So if you're doing lots of moving about of different things, remove the springs first, put them in a little plastic bag, set them aside, do whatever it is you're doing with your modelling, and then you can come back to these when you do the final fitment later on. What I tend to do is just make sure that we've got them extended the right amount so that they match this end of the wagon and look right. And then we'll just add a tiny bit of glue to that nut on the thread, and that will just prevent it from coming loose. So there we go, that is one buffer modified, ready for use with a wagon. Now it comes to the fitment of the buffers, and the buffers, as with the couplings, it's really important that you get all of these at the same height on your rolling stock, because nothing looks worse on a layout than two buffers that are at the wrong height. It just doesn't happen on the real railway. So we need to mark out the centre holes for the buffers, and I know from looking at photographs that it corresponds with these centre points where they halfway along the buffer beams there, and sort of right underneath that line there. So I'm just going to use a little pin vise with a 1.5mm diameter drill bit to create a centre hole, and I'm just going to go in there, and then we want the same on the other side. So if I just create these using this pin vise, this is just to get the hole started really. So I'm going to use a larger diameter drill bit. Let's have a look, this one here. And you can actually use your fingers to do this, because the resin is such a soft material that it becomes quite easy to drill out using your fingers. So you can just do that quite carefully, a little bit at a time. And make sure as well at the same time that you don't go too far. You can just do a quick dry run. And you can see now the buffer head goes all the way into the buffer housing, as it should do, and there's no fouling there, so that nut is not hitting on any of the resin behind. It's sprung perfectly. There's nothing worse than a buffer that you push in, gets stuck, and doesn't come back out again. So that one's done on that side. Let's do the same on the other side, and then we'll catch up and start having a look at the couplings. So now comes the task of fitting the little couplings that we've got on the end of the wagon. Now, supplied with the kit were some 3-link couplings on this coupling hook here, which is cast in brass and looks very nice, but unfortunately the real wagons have instanters. And so again, I turn to Slater's plasticard because it offers reference M7025, an instanter coupling kit set, and this is the same one that's supplied with many of its kits. You get an etched brass coupling hook, an instanter link, which is this little piece cast here in again in lost wax brass. So this is the instanter link that you get, and you can see we've got 2 little hooks there at the bottom. And the way this works is that if you want to couple up your wagons in a train and you want to have the distance between the couplings far away, you have them like so. And if you want to tighten up the couplings, then you can use a shunter's pole and pull that coupling around and have it in the shortened position like so. The first thing we're going to do is create our holes in this piece of resin. Now handily, as part of this, this little moulding, we've got a hole here in which we can locate our coupling hook and its spring, but we haven't got the slot to be able to feed that coupling hook through. So we're going to create that using, again, the 1.5mm diameter drill bit fitted inside the pin vise, and we're going to eyeball this. I want to make sure that it's halfway there, and we're just going to drill straight through. No messing. Small hole into an oval, and I'm just going to do that by dragging the drill bit down as I rotate it. So you can see this is the coupling hook that was supplied with the kit, and we've got a little bit of flash around the edges there, but otherwise it's a nice shape and it's got a good 3D appearance to it. So we'll just tidy that up. And then comes the task of opening up these links to add this instanter link. Now the instanter link is used in place of the centre link in a 3-link coupling. So these being steel links, you can just easily separate them by twisting them with some pliers like so. Easy as pie. Out it comes, that centre link, and then you can add in this extra link here, or substitute link rather. So we can close that up on one side. That's one side in. And another important bit to check is that when you've got your instanter links, they don't foul on the edge of the front face of the coupling there. You can see that there is a bit of a drag there. You see that? So we need to remove that with a file. It doesn't take much. We're just going to remove a small amount of material from the hook. Just do the same on that side, and then we can fit this last link in there like that. And hey presto, we've made ourselves an instanter coupling. Now, we made that hole, so we just need to check that that fits in okay, which it does, which means that we can get the spring that was supplied with the coupling, which this is the bit where you don't want the spring to go flying off, because the chances are you'll never see it again. So if you are prone to seeing springs fly off, then work over an area, or perhaps put something up around the edges. Anyway, you can see what I've done here at the other end is I've created a little brass pin. This is just a neat way of holding the spring in position on the wagon there. And I don't want it to come all the way through once it's in position. So what I'm going to do is just flatten one end with a pair of pliers, steel jawed obviously for the strength. I'm going to go straight in the edge there where we can apply maximum pressure, and we're just going to crush it. And that's created a head on this little piece of brass, and that's going to stop it from coming through the hole in our coupling there. You can see there, that won't fit through because I haven't drilled it out yet. So 1.5mm diameter drill bit again, and then we can fit these in place again with that spring behind. And our little bit of brass that we made. So I'm just going to cut this short now at the back with the shears. Now we need to compress the spring as we apply this pin, and it's not the easiest of tasks to do because you almost need more hands than you have. So you need to push the spring down like so. So it's now in, and just to hold that in position to make sure that it doesn't part company, because that's the last thing we want, is for this to part company and the spring to go flying. I'm just going to add a little dab of super glue there on the base of it, and it doesn't need to be much, just so long as it holds that pin in place, and we'll just leave that to dry, and hopefully we should have one sprung coupling. And next month we'll be looking at creating custom components, again using this wagon as the basis, so stay tuned for that. You'll find all the details for the products used in this little practical on the Slater's Plasticard website. Check out the address below and you'll find out all you need to know. Till next month, take care. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for this episode, but don't forget that next episode will have plenty of more great practical tips and, of course, another layout in store. If you've got any suggestions for content that you'd like us to feature on BRM TV, please get in touch with us. You can send an email to brm@warnersgroup.co.uk and we'll take everything into consideration. We do read every email that is sent. Until next time, however, take care, happy modelling, and we'll see you around.